Welcome, Mitch. It's lovely to have you here, for being willing to do an interview with me. I'm sure we're going to have a bit of fun going through this. So it's Mitch Kaye. You'll introduce yourself anyway from the Academy. As I said, it's lovely to have you here. We'll just go through a series of questions. Let's see and explore where it goes. I'm sure you'll have some lovely nuggets for people listening to this podcast and this recording. So
Oh,
welcome, Mitch.
my best.
I'm sure you'll be fine. So just tell us a little bit about who you are. Just tell us a bit, who you are, what you do.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
My name is Mitch. I am the CEO and the co-founder of a PR agency called The Academy.
Brilliant. And so tell us a bit about the business. What do you do?
Sure. Well, we have a series of clients who we help. We operate in the space of consumer PR. So brands like Amazon, Disney, Morrison's, MasterCard, Burger King, Tinder. I'm getting into trouble now because I'm going to forget somebody and offend somebody, but big consumer brands. And we look after their media relations, their influencer relations. We help them launch things, talk about the things that they want to talk about. Sometimes we help them avoid a problem. Sometimes we help them define what they're trying to achieve. And we are their retained partner, their creative comms partner to help them win every day.
Yeah, that's a very impressive list. I was looking at the website, some impressive list of clients there for sure. So so in terms of yourself, who's the first person that comes to mind when you think of success?
Well, I'm going to give you two, and it might be a bit cliched, but I'm going to definitely say my mum and dad. They would be the
Oh
first people.
wow, that's pretty cool. And why is that?
Well, my earliest memories are growing up in a house in Bournemouth where they ran a family business and both worked together, obviously. And they were my early introduction to working life from afar. So, mum was a brilliant salesperson and was brilliant at just getting a deal done. Dad was a brilliant people manager and a brilliant administrator of a business. And I learned so much from both of them. They were so complementary in terms of how they worked and what their strengths were. But I learned so much from both of them that I think they set the bar for me very early on, like long before I'd even gone to university or thought about a career. The bar was set really high from them.
Yeah, it's lovely to hear that. I mean, I love working with family businesses. It's interesting because a lot of people are self-made and they've had no family business experience, but you do get that interesting where family have had a business. It does have an impact on people, which is fantastic. So tell us about how your path to becoming a CEO, because lots of people have businesses. They're not necessarily a CEO. Most businesses are what we call micro businesses, employing less than 10 people. In fact, most businesses don't employ one person. So to be a CEO of a company is interesting. So how did you become the CEO?
It's a good question. Not sure it was the plan on day one. I always wanted to be a journalist when I was at university. That was my dream. And the dream kind of came to a shuddering halt when I was at university and I did lots of work experience at national newspapers and magazines and realized very quickly that that environment wasn't going to be for me. It didn't feel entrepreneurial enough. It just felt it felt exciting, but it felt very negative in some respects from an environment point of view. I didn't enjoy being in a newsroom, didn't really enjoy being in that kind of dynamic. And then my big break came when I did some work experience at Sky Television. That was the last work experience placement of a very long summer of work experiences. Um, and it was a game changer from the minute I walked into their building. And there was something about the building, the environment, the energy, the ambition, the people. They just won the Premier League television rights, and they were launching digital television. This is in the late 90s, and
Mm.
it was an amazing place to be in the perfect era to be there. And that was my start point. And I worked for some amazing people there, some really talented people. And then I left there a couple of years later, and I joined a really small agency called Shine. I think I was their eighth or ninth hire in 1999, and I met Rachel Bell, and Rachel Bell was the founder and the CEO of Shine. And she was, I would say, alongside my mum and dad, she's probably the biggest other influence on my whole career, really. And that was a meeting 25 years ago. And I saw the way she managed on day one. I saw the way she handled situations and spoke to people. And handled clients and handled recruitment, and I loved what she did and I loved the way she did it. So if you take my dad, who is the ultimate manager of people, and then you take Rachel Bell, who I think is just a phenomenally talented, intuitive, kind, emotionally intelligent leader, and you put the two together, they were my inspiration. And I guess try to learn from every single person I've worked for along the way. And really, my big break came at the end of 2005. I'd left Rachel, gone off to work in other places, and then come back to Shine. She'd hired me
Right.
back, and we'd worked for 2 years together. And then it was Rachel who suggested that she should back me to set my first agency up, and that was a life-changing moment. She obviously saw something in me that was incredible for her to give me that opportunity. So in 2006, I launched my first agency, backed by Rachel. And that was probably the pathway to becoming a CEO, first of all, a managing director, and then ultimately a CEO. And that was the pathway, really. But the inspiration from those people and Rachel's backing made that possible.
Brilliant. Absolutely phenomenal. That's such a lovely story. And it's interesting. We have something called the entrepreneur, we call it entrepreneurial ladder. And we say that you can start on that ladder. A lot of people think you can start on the ladder when you open your first business. But what we say to people who are not in business is that actually you can start learning as a trainee or a first employee. And it's interesting that you said that the environment you find yourself in, you might not be an entrepreneur at that time, but you can watch and learn and see lots of things are going on.
Yeah.
And that can be a major learning spot on your journey that a lot
Yeah.
of people tend to not think that there's an opportunity.
It's a really good point. And it's something I talk to a lot about to my team now, especially the team who are in their first or second jobs. And I almost say to them, I call it something slightly different, but it's exactly the same concept. I almost talk about keeping a leadership log. And sometimes I do it because if someone is struggling with the line manager they have or the head of the team that they're working into, you can learn so much from the way people maybe shouldn't do things. And if I look back at my career, I've been really blessed with working for some unbelievable people. But maybe some of the people that have managed me at times maybe haven't been quite as remarkable, or maybe not as been quite as remarkable for me, but I've learned probably even more from those people. And I think you get to a point, I certainly got to a point long before I set my first company up, where I would see someone walk into a room and inspire people. And I
Mm,
would think to myself, okay, if I ever manage my own business, if I'm going to do that. And sometimes I'd watch someone get it really badly wrong. There's a couple of times, definitely not going to name any names, but there's a couple of times that spring to mind where someone lost the room really badly or lost the company really badly by saying something or not saying something. And I remember thinking at the time, if ever I do their job, I'm sure it's way harder than it looks, but if ever I do their job, I will never do that. It's almost like a mental log. And
yeah,
I think you get to a point in your career where if you've logged enough good things and you've logged enough bad things, you kind of need to stop judging other people's work and have a go for yourself and put your own
100%.
name to it and see if it's
Yeah.
as easy or difficult as it seems. And I guess that's what I did.
I was going to ask you some of your learnings as a CEO, but it's interesting. You told me some of your reflections in terms of your journey. But as a CEO, what sort of things do you think you've learned, good lessons that you maybe share with another CEO?
How long have you got? So many. I try and keep it to three, only because we'll be talking all day. I learned a million things, and normally by making mistakes or missing something and then realizing and trying not to make the same mistake again.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I think overpromising, just to avoid overpromising. Sometimes people overpromise because they're dishonest. It was never my way. I would overpromise because I was overly optimistic. And what I've learned many, many times over the years is to never make a promise that you can't guarantee you can keep. So if you make a promise to somebody with good intentions coming from a good place, but it's not in your gift or not in your control to be able to guarantee that you can deliver that promise, don't make the promise, because
Yeah,
people hang off your every word and they remember. And rightly so, if you make a promise to someone, they should remember it. But if you can't deliver that promise, you break their trust. And if you break their trust, it's really hard to get it back again. So
hard to get it back.
that's an obvious one, but a really important one. So the second one, I guess, goes from over promising to under celebrating. So it's in my nature and it's in my business partner's nature, who I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later. But my business partner, Dan, and I are cut from the same cloth. We are both the kind of people who never want to get complacent, never want to stop and pat ourselves on the back, never want to believe our own hype. So when something great happens, it could be a pitch win, it could be we've won an award, it could be a great piece of work's been delivered. It's in our nature to enjoy a very brief, fleeting moment and then move on very quickly. The problem with that is that the team around you need to enjoy that moment and deserve to enjoy that moment. And if they don't enjoy that moment and there aren't those moments, the job becomes very transactional and very relentless and very difficult. So we both had to try very, very hard over the years to pause and give ourselves permission, and therefore everybody else, to enjoy the moment, to celebrate success, and to make sure that that's part of our culture. And actually, if we're not naturally the best at doing that, then what's really important is that other people around us, and we've got brilliant people around us, help us do that. So that's definitely and I think the final one is probably the antidote of the second one, which is just not to believe your own hype. So I think what I've learned is that you need to stay very level in this job. So when you're winning really big and you've won 2 or 3 pitches in a month and people are saying great things about you, or you've won an award, or you're getting accolades, you're never quite as good as the person that people are describing. And when you're struggling and a client resigns you, or people are leaving, or the numbers don't quite look right, or something's wobbling, you're never quite as bad as you may feel in that moment. And actually to stay quite centered and be able to, not have the extreme reactions that I think wobble people around you. Easier said than done. Much easier to give as a tip than to practice day to day, but that's definitely a learning as well.
Great stuff. Yeah, so great. Don't over promise. Celebrate your successes, because it's interesting you say that the team need to feel good for that period of time. Even if you're under pressure and you want to go, you got to give them that moment. I love that one. And then the last one is don't believe your own hype. Yeah, it's never as bad as it might seem, and it's not always as good as it might seem either. Both are good cautions, because people can get a bit carried away. And
Absolutely.
then when the bad times come, it can be a big, big blow.
Absolutely.
And the same thing, you get criticized and you just focus on the criticism.
For sure. But by the way, if you believe you're as bad as you are in a bad moment, but you don't allow yourself to believe you're as good as you are in a good moment, that's a very difficult path to sustain. So you've either got to do both extremes and let them balance each other out, or you've got to stay very level if you can and not indulge either. But the only thing you can't do is go to the depths, but not the highs, because that's not sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. The highs and lows of the life of a CEO, isn't it? You don't want to have too many of them. Bit level is a bit more fun. So what does a typical day look like to you as a CEO?
Not sure there's such
if there is a typical day.
I'm not sure there is. There's definitely routines. I am a creature of habit, and there's routines that I think work for me. There's definitely not a typical day. If there was, I think the job would be much easier in a way, but maybe much less interesting. So I'm an early riser, and I like getting going early. I like getting ahead of things. If I could be at my desk at 7 a.m., I would, because I do some of my best work early on. It's quiet. I feel like psychologically I'm ahead of something. So I try and do my reading and my thinking and my planning for the day early on. I try and make myself a list every single day. I've got a to-do list, which is never ending and has some long-term objectives and some short-term stuff. And I make myself a daily to-do list from my master to-do list. And I try and take what I have to achieve in that day, write it down on a separate list, and then I race to get ahead of that list as early as I can. If I can get that whole list done by 10 a.m., I'm winning, because no doubt in that day, something else will come up. So I try and beat the clock and beat myself, and I'm endlessly making lists, which probably makes me sound slightly mad, but it works for me. And if you give yourself an early start, you have the luxury of time. And if you have the luxury of time and you're not up against it, you can think. And you need to think in this job, because if you're just doing and never thinking, you miss stuff.
Absolutely. In Action Coach, we're big fans of lists, by the way. Something that Brad instilled in us from day one. Action Daily. We actually have something called Action Daily Lists, and we encourage people to, maybe at first daily can be a bit of a challenge, but we say at least at the beginning of the week or end of the week. Some people prefer to plan on a Sunday night or something like that. But we say at least at the beginning of every week, at least have a list of what the key things you need to do to hit your goals. So we encourage that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. We say the level up from that is to do it every day. And you'd be surprised how people struggle with just write what you're going to do today. Not everything you need to do, just today. And we call it the eat the frog sheet is the short word for it. We call it the eat the frog from the book from Brian Tracy that talks about eating the frog, doing those big things first. But I love that. Come in early, get things done by 10 o'clock. It's a massive psychological hit as well when you come in so early. Brilliant. So we talk about aspirations and for a company because most business owners want to grow in some sense or the other. So what's your aspirations for the company in the next, say, 5 years or so?
I tend to look at impact rather than growth. So in other words, we're currently 60 people. I don't ever think, what would I need to do to get to 70 people or 80 people or 100 people? We're currently a 7 million revenue business. I might think sometimes, how do we get to become a 10 million pound revenue business? There's growth there. But actually what I think Dan and I are more likely to do is look at the type of work we're doing and look at the impact we're having for our clients and challenge ourselves to have a bigger impact. How can we make the work bigger? How can we get it seen by more people? How can we make the work more relevant? How can we cut through? So when we measure that work, the client is happier with the outcome. And I think if you focus on those things and you run a good business, then growth looks after itself, because what happens is you grow your clients organically. First of all, you keep your clients, you retain them, and you grow them organically because the work is working and it's having a bigger impact. Then what happens as a result of that is that your reputation grows. And then what happens as a result of that is that you end up on more pitch lists and you end up winning more pitches because there's really good momentum around you and there's good hype around you. So you end up growing, but you grow because you've earned the right to grow, because you focus not on growth in your own in terms of your own metrics, but you focus on the growth of the product and the impact. That's what we do. So how can we make our work bigger is our daily obsession. How can it play out across more channels? How can it have a bigger impact?
Yeah.
If we make our clients win, then we'll win too.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, we certainly like it because we certainly talk to clients about value, add value. If you create enough value for people who are willing to pay, as you said, growth will come.
Yeah.
If you focus on growth, there can be a risk that you start forgetting about actually why you're in business in the first place, isn't it? So it's a big risk. So I like that. Yeah, impact and impacting wider society is great as well. So we talked about learnings, but what about as an employer? Because this is one of the things that, we often say to clients, what's your biggest challenge, time, team, or money? But team, once you get larger, can be a challenge, can be a good thing too. What sort of challenges have you had when it comes to sort of employees?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the bigger you get, the harder it gets. There's more people, which means there's more different types of personalities. There's more people challenges. That the bigger you get, that's obvious. I think I try and work on a very simple premise that worked for me growing up working for other people. So when that was me, either my first job at Sky or working for Rachel or other agencies and kind of making my way through my career, the worst thing I used to find is that if I didn't really know where I stood, or I had to try and read between the lines and work out what someone was telling me, I used to find that really exhausting and really stressful and really demotivating. I like to know where I stand. I like to know when it's good, and I like to know when it isn't very good. Rachel was very good at telling me what a brilliant job I'd done, and she was equally adept at telling me when I hadn't really done such a great job and explaining why. And I think so that's a philosophy, very simple philosophy. And I think we try and be very, very straight and direct and honest with people on the basis that most people like to know where they stand. So that's not just about annual performance reviews, that's day to day. When something's great, we tell them it's great. When it's not so good, we tell them it's not so good. And we're very clear on that. We have everyone at the academy has a scorecard with relative to their level. So twice a year when they're having a check-in or a review, they will fill in a scorecard against every single element of their job description, and the person managing them will do the same thing. And where there's discrepancies, that becomes a big part of the review. But checking in with ourselves, being honest about what we can and can't do. There's so many different ways that people can have a successful career. If I look at our competitor set and I look at the people running those businesses now, they're all very different people. Some people are loud, some people are quiet. Some people are naturally very confident, some people are introvert. Some people are brilliant speakers and communicators, some people aren't. Some people are strategic minds, some people are creatives, some people are just very good business people. There's so many different ways you can win in this industry. It doesn't really matter what you're good at and what you're not good at, as long as you A, recognize that, B, you mitigate it with what you have around you. But it comes down to a place of honesty, and honesty and people knowing where they stand is really important. So I think that's the biggest single thing we have as an employer. I think kindness. You know, we have a thing where we won't hire anybody who we don't think is kind. And they can be extremely talented, but if they're not kind with it, it doesn't tend to last very long. And that's a very important principle that we have in our business, and in every business that we've ever run. You have to be kind. You have to be a team player. You have to put other people ahead of yourself. And if you don't have those qualities at the academy, then you don't tend to last too long.
That's really interesting. What's fascinating is that there's a book called The 1 Minute Manager. And in The 1 Minute Manager, we often teach to as you said, to business owners, they call it the daily praise. But to find somebody in the organization to praise, that's one of the principles that they look at. Find somebody you can say, you did a good job, well done, whatever. But also there's a thing called a 1 minute reprimand. Reprimand is a bit of a big word, but it's American. So maybe reprimand, we wouldn't use the term reprimand in the UK unless it was something fairly serious. But we get the principle, which is, as you said, point out when something's not right. And as you said, one of the things we do find is that a lot of complaints from staff is, I don't know what my manager thinks. And usually we call it the power of, the law of vacuum. If you don't know what your manager thinks, you make something up.
Yeah.
And usually it's pretty negative, because people think, if he's not talking to me, does he not like me? And people start getting a bit negative. They don't necessarily presume everything's okay. They think, we had a one-to-one, I'm not getting any feedback. Or the danger is what you said at the beginning in business, which is you're deluded about how good you are, because nobody said you're not good, so you must be doing well. So you just carry on doing what you're doing until somebody says, well, that's not right. And you think, I've been here a year, nobody's ever said anything. So
or you have your review and it's a bombshell review where you learn something that you hadn't realized for
what on earth's happened.
And nothing disconnects people from a business quicker than when they walk into a review and there's some kind of bombshell shock element. They just hadn't seen it coming. Either you're not ready or it's not really working. And if people learn something, I always think if people learn something for the first time in their annual performance review, the system's broken because they're not being managed properly. There's a lack of honesty in that culture. They're not asking the right questions or being self-aware enough. The person managing them isn't being honest enough, or they're not in control and on top of what that person's doing. There's so many ills in that, or so many red flags that show the machine isn't working. But there should be no surprises. Reviews should be
absolutely
not always easy, but they should be predictable.
Yeah, and I like that. I watched a video with Simon Sinek on leadership. I try and get clips if I'm doing training and stuff. And one of them was when he was one of the top Marines or top military people in the US. And he was asking them about how they make a decision in employment. And you said kindness. If they're not kind, and they say something, he says something like, can I trust you? So have you got my back? And you imagine somebody's in the military. If you can't trust this person, then there's an issue, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. They said a high performance, but bad attitude, they don't want them. So they'd rather have not so high performance, but great attitude. You can train performance. So it's just interesting that you said that, isn't it? If somebody's not kind, but they're a really good performer, but they could cause a havoc in your company.
100%. And actually, I've often thought over the years, because look, you know, you recruit somebody, there's no point asking them if they're kind, because no one in the history of job interviews has ever sat there and said, I'm absolutely not kind. You need to know I'm not a kind person. But sometimes you misjudge it, and sometimes you think they're kind, and then they show their true selves as time goes on. I always think the sign of a good culture is when the one or two people in the business who aren't quite aligned with the values of the group stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
What it means is 98% of the group share the same values. Now, if unkind people don't stand out and are in stark contrast to the rest of the group, well, then you've got a problem on a much bigger scale. So I quite like the fact actually that often it's the group who police the group and the values and the culture. It isn't me or Dan or Chris, who's our brilliant MD, or the excellent directors we've got at the academy. Actually, the group work out the group. And that's, I think, always the way it should be.
Brilliant. I love that. Is there any particular books, audios, or whatever? Because there's so many different mediums now. People have YouTube videos, all sorts of things. Any would you recommend to people? Any you particularly like?
Well, I can see the irony of this answer because I've probably got 300 books on the shelf behind me. But if you look really closely, if you were to zoom in, you'd see most of them are about football or football management. So I'm definitely a football manager in the body of a PR agency CEO. Truth be told, I'm not a massive reader, unlike my business partner who will read a book a week, normally on advertising. I'm not a massive reader. I listen to lots of podcasts every single day. I'm listening to a different podcast. I learn a huge amount from those. It's probably my lack of attention span that means that's my preferred media. But I do love Dave Trott. It's one name I'll throw at you, who Dan introduced me to many, many years ago. Dave Trott is a advertising copywriting legend and has for many, many years written an absolutely brilliant blog, which I think is as relevant to people working in PR as it is advertising. And actually, I think it's as relevant to people in life as it is in work. And it's just beautifully written, as you would expect from Dave Trott. And every single blog that I read from him, I learn something, and it gets me thinking, and it definitely gives me something, you know, food for thought to apply to my job and my life. He's written some brilliant books too. There's a book called Creative Mischief that he wrote. Also, Mischief being the name of the first company I launched, but that's a coincidence. But Creative Mischief is just a brilliant collection of lessons. Predatory Thinking was another book he wrote, which is about how to win against your opposition. It's kind of, you know, a very strategic, very creative way of winning. Doesn't matter what field you're in. So I think he would probably be my go-to. But you should probably interview Dan if you want proper book recommendations.
He's the book person, is he?
Very much the book person, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter what book, because growth is growth. If you're getting something from it and learning from it and it's stimulating you, open to ideas, that's the point. Because what's the point of reading loads of books and then somebody asks you something, you can't remember any of them and don't apply any of it? It's really entertainment, isn't it? But so we do expect our business owners to sort of learn and act. Otherwise, we say, well, it's just enjoyment. But there's nothing wrong with enjoyment as well.
Yeah, I mean, actually, on that, I do think there's a lot of virtue in learning from outside of your sector. So yes, you've got to know your sector. Of course you do. Yes, you've got to know about your competitors, what's happening in your industry, the future of it, the direction of travel. Of course, those things are a given. But actually, I think you can learn a huge amount from outside of your sector. So for me, understanding how people manage footballers at a football club, for example, how players are recruited, for example. It's not that I'm paying transfer fees, fortunately, for PR employees, but the way you sell a football club to a player is the way you sell a PR agency to a potential hire. The way you motivate footballers and the way you motivate people in your agency are surprisingly similar. So I think you can take inspiration outside of your core area and then bring it back in. And sometimes I think that's something that maybe not enough CEOs do because they're very, very focused, understandably, on their own sector.
Yeah, something we encourage too. I definitely encourage that because I use a lot of sporting analogies, but if you're a sporting person, it's easier. But even people who are not sporting, there's a lot you can transfer from high performance sport to the business world. Because as you said, it's about how do you get the best out of people that are around you. And at the end of the day, high performance sport is the same. How do you get the best out of somebody who may be a genius, but difficult to cope with or manage? So fantastic, brilliant. What about mistakes? It's interesting. Talk about the successes, mistakes you've learned from. Anything you would share from us, the biggest mistake or a mistake you would share, what you learned from it?
Again, how long have you got? Uh, so many, so many. I mean, I make very quick decisions. Dan and I work at a massive pace every day. Now, there's a virtue to pace. I think pace is a competitive advantage. I think when you're an entrepreneurial business, I think if you're not quick and you don't have pace, I think you have to be quicker than your clients. And if they're waiting for you all the time, it doesn't play well. I think when you're working at that pace, you make mistakes every day. I think the trick is to not make the same mistake twice, or to make sure your mistakes are not existential, but relatively small mistakes you can make up for. So mistakes I've made, certainly some hires over the years. Uh, we've hired a lot of people. You can't always get that right. If you're hiring, if your recruitment is 90% brilliant, then that's 10% you've probably got wrong. And if you've hired 1,000 people, that's 100 bad hires. So that has the potential to cause some challenges. So I think probably those. Sometimes I've been too honest with people, or maybe delivered something in a way that was not the right tone or the right moment, only coming from a good place, but maybe delivered in the wrong way. They're definitely mistakes. We've definitely made mistakes with clients over the years. Again, impossible not to. But if I'm honest, I think we definitely have a culture of learning from mistakes. I encourage everyone to make mistakes, because if your objective every day is to try and avoid a mistake, then I think you go very cautious in terms of how you do your job, and I think you end up being nowhere really that you need to be. So I think mistakes are part of growing, and in honesty, I think we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for the mistakes that we'd made. So if I could go back and change that, would there be a moment I could go back and change? Probably not, because if I changed it, then somehow it wouldn't lead us to where we are now. And I think some of the biggest mistakes we've made are probably the things that we've learned from the most.
No, I love that. It's one of the things we see in so many successful people is mistakes, and fear of failure is one of the biggest reasons not to act, isn't it? So we realize successful people, we see the success, or when I say we, the role, when people see successful people, they think, oh, amazing, they're superheroes and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And you often don't see the amount of mistakes they made to do it because you had to. But the difference is how do you recover from them rather than just let it defeat you. So it's really nice to hear that.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's easy. The easy bit is to say we have a culture of people being brave and trying different things, and people are encouraged to make mistakes. That's the easy bit. That's the bit that you read out of a book, and anyone can say that. I think actually the much harder bit is that when someone does that and makes a really big mistake, how do you react as a business? So if you end up, if your initial reaction is panic or fear or anger or frustration or aggression, then that culture dies with your initial
Very
reaction
quickly.
very quickly. So actually, the real test isn't to say to people, try different things, be brave. Anyone can do that. The real test is when they do that and it goes horribly wrong, do you lead from the front and they stand behind you and you front it up with them, or do you do the opposite? So I think they're the moments that define your culture, and we try very hard to back our people. We've got brilliant staff. Like, we're really proud of our team, and you've got to be proud of your team when they make a mistake as well as when they win an award. You have to do both.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. So, just conscious of time, got a few more questions before we finish. You did, you sold a business before, previously sold a business. Would you sell this one?
Well, I could never sit here and say absolutely not, because I think that would be disingenuous. We are an entrepreneurial business. We don't think about selling our business. And what I mean by that is a bit like the answer I gave you 10 minutes ago about growth. We don't think, how do we get from 60 people to 70 people or 80 people? We think about the impact we have. So we don't wake up every morning and think, what could we sell our business for? How much money would we make? What we do is we try and build the best business in the country in our space. That's our objective. Build the best business we can build, and build a business so good that one day someone might want to buy it. Now, that doesn't mean we might want to sell it. Dan and I have sold one business. It was called Mischief, and we sold it to a group called Engine. And we had 2 very good years at Engine post sale. And that business still today is doing really well. It's got a great leadership team, and they're absolutely flying. They're a brilliant agency. So we know what it means and what it takes to sell a business. We also know what it takes to lose our independence, because you end up working for somebody else and you lose that kind of entrepreneurial control that we have now again. I think you give that up at your peril, because actually we're probably at our best when we're free to make those quick decisions under our own steam. So the job isn't to sell, the job is to do something so good that someone might want to buy it one day, because what it means is you're hitting high standards every day, you're running a great business, you're growing and developing a brilliant leadership team, you're doing fantastic work, your client list is amazing, your numbers support that, there's an excitement and a momentum around your business. So they're the things we want. Now, if they lead to someone knocking on the door one day, great, that's good news. But if someone knocks on the door and wants to talk about buying your business, it's a massive compliment for everyone in that business. And on that note, I would say that unless that deal works for everyone in that business, it's a bad deal. So when you're weighing up any interest that you have, you're going, yes, of course, are the numbers right? Would it be the right deal? But also, would it be exciting for my management team? Would it be motivating for the people that only joined in the last 6 to 12 months? That joined what they thought was a certain type of business? How would they feel? Having gone through that process once, I think we understand a lot more now about the journey that everyone would need to go on for that to be a good deal. So lots of things in there, but hopefully I haven't properly answered your question.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's a great answer. And you mentioned your business partner. Does it make life easier or more difficult?
Well, that depends on what day you ask me. It definitely makes life easier. He is my closest friend in the world, and I think the word, I've said this many times. I think the word genius is used too often, but he is a genius. He is the cleverest person I've ever worked with, and he is difficult, and he would probably tell you that I'm difficult, and I think we're difficult with each other every single day. And what that really means is we demand a lot from ourselves, we demand a lot from each other. We keep each other honest. We are each other's biggest critics, but also biggest supporters. And it is a brilliant partnership. It's also a 19-year-old partnership. And I don't think there are too many double acts in our industry that have managed to go 19 years without falling out. Luckily, we fall out at least once a week, so we don't have to worry about that. But we're a really good team. And to run a business with your best mate is a real privilege, because you've got each other's backs, and it's definitely easier.
It sounds fantastic. So my penultimate question is, if I gave you £100 million to positively change or build a company that dominated your industry, what would you do with it?
Ooh,
It's a lot of money, £100 million.
it's a lot of money. What would I do with it? Okay, so I'd first of all look at people, and I would assemble the greatest team of people that I could possibly assemble that money could buy. And truthfully, I kind of think I've already got that team. But if you give me £100 million, then I would spend more on even better people to join the people I've got to complement them. That could be hires, it could be acquisitions. So I know the areas I want to grow into. I would potentially buy the best, most exciting, most academy-like minded brands out there who see the world we do in those respective areas. That's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is, we've just spent time, money, and energy on a massive refurbishment of our office, and we all moved back in 2 weeks ago. So I'm currently feeling very, very excited and very happy about the environment that we're working in every day, which I think is really important. But I guess if you had £100 million, you'd probably buy your own office, be your own landlord, and that would be an opportunity. The third thing I'd probably do probably sounds a bit left field, and I don't know how this would work. and I haven't looked into it because I don't have £100 million to spend, but something along the lines of helping anyone in my team get on the property ladder in London for the first time. And I don't have a plan around what that looks like. But if you gave me £100 million, I'd find one. I would love to help people do what I did many, many years ago when it was much easier than it is now, and get on the property ladder in London. I think it would change the way people see their relationship with their work. It would change how they feel. It would change how they view their future trajectories. And I think it would be an amazing thing if a company could aid their employers to get on the property ladder. And what it shouldn't do is trap an employer to never be able to leave that company. It's like, it can't be that.
Yeah.
But it could just be some way that you could help. And I think that would be ultimate. I think that would be the ultimate. Now, how much of that 100 million you'd have left, I'm not sure. But I think
even a small contribution would probably help a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. If you could do something in those three areas, I think it would be a brilliant use of money. What I would say is we already have a brilliant team. We already have a brilliant office. We haven't quite cracked the mortgage offer thing. But the thing about our industry is you actually don't need £100 million. You need some brilliant people. You need a great space to work in. You need energy. You need a laptop. You need a mobile phone. And actually, if you bring those things together, it's amazing how far you can get without the £100 million. Although I wouldn't say no if you were offering.
If only I had it. I like that. I love it. I'm one of those softies that when I watch something like Undercover Boss, I get all emotional when that end bit where it's usually a he, where he goes and helps certain people. He says, you know, you had a problem with your property or something like that.
Yeah.
Here's £50,000 for a deposit, or here's a new car. I get really emotional at that point. I think that is a phenomenal thing to watch, that you can say thank you to an employee who's gone beyond and just say, here's a gift that will change your life. I find that I just get very emotional. Every time I watch it, I think, why am I getting emotional? I don't even know these people, but I think it's fantastic. So final question, for those listening to the recording, what couple of tips would you give them, somebody in business today?
There's the obvious ones that I'm going to rattle off, but they're pretty cliched. I think work ethic. I think the people earning the most amount of money should work the hardest. I'll give you one which I haven't always followed, but I have done in more recent years, which is to exercise to stay well. It is a difficult job. It's not the hardest job in the world, by the way. I think many, many other people do much harder jobs than we do. But it's a high pressure job. I think you have to stay well, however you do that. For some people, it will be going to the gym every day. For some people, it will be mindfulness. For some people, it will be, escaping or a hobby. But you have to keep yourself well and manage yourself through whatever you're doing. They're the obvious ones. I think other things would be to maybe not lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing. Sometimes you can get so wrapped up in the job and the objectives and the drive behind success, maybe you lose sight of why you're doing that. And I think you need reminders in your life. It could be the people around you, could be family, friends. It might be that you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, and that could play out in lots of different ways, but you need reminders of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think if you do that, it's a brilliant job and it's a sustainable job. And if you don't, maybe at some point you'll hit a wall and there'll be some kind of crisis of identity. So to make sure that you keep yourself well and keep yourself balanced. And I think maybe I would return to the first point I made on your first question, which is to try and stay level. You're never as good as the headline suggests when you're winning, but you're 1000% never as bad as you might feel in the moment where you have a difficult day. So to stay level and to keep some kind of perspective too.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Mitch, it's been a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for spending a bit of time with me and sharing these lovely nuggets with others. I wish you all the success.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.